Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third webinar in the series of World Heritage Multiple Memories, hosted by Cultural Heritage Administration of Republic of Korea. I am Harry Shim from the Preparatory Office for the International Center for the Interpretation and Presentation of World Heritage Sites under the auspices of UNESCO. The Preparatory Office is an organizer of this event, a UNESCO Category 2 center carrying out researching, capacity building, and networking in the field of heritage interpretation. The center will officially establish by end of this year. We organized this webinar series to identify and to discuss various new issues related to multi-layered narratives and sometimes conflicting interpretations of history that are attached to world heritage. Since adopting the convention, heritage conservation has focused more on protecting physical authenticity of heritage. However, as we can see from the cases like Hagia Sophia reverting to mosque, or Japan's Meiji Industrial Revolution sites, which has diverse perspectives and stories, there is a rising interest on multiple narratives due to diverse stakeholders and community engagement in heritage management. So we are offering a series of discussions to talk about how to protect our heritage and to manage the conflict in this multi-dimensional society. Facing 50th anniversary of a World Heritage Convention next year, I think this series will raise timely questions and provide good discussions for a better protection of our heritage. Now, let me introduce the moderator of the webinar, Dr. Jean-Louis Luxen. Dr. Luxen is a Belgian senior civil servant involved in heritage conservation since 1975. He has been a Secretary General of ICOMOS from 1993 to 2002, involved in the implementation of the World Heritage Convention and in the organization of the Nara Conference of 1994, and also a member of the board International Coalition of Sites of Conscience from 2007 to 2019. Importantly, he was a chair of the UNESCO Expert Working Group on Interpretation of Sites of Memory in 2018, which is the core reference when dealing with the difficult heritage. Before beginning the webinar, I would like to let you know that you can leave your questions or comments in the Zoom Q&A box if you're in Zoom, and also on our YouTube during the webinar. There will be a Q&A session after the discussion, so please share your thoughts. And it will be much appreciated if the question is simple and clear. So now I would like to turn the time over to our moderator. The floor is yours, Jean-Louis.
Welcome to all the audience. Thank you to the organizer for the invitation. Also on behalf of my three colleagues, thank you, Harry, for your introduction to this third webinar on World Heritage Multiple Memories. The theme of contested multiple memories is important and very sensitive. We congratulate our colleagues of Korea for their audacious initiative. The first two webinars have opened the way with very stimulating general considerations. It's difficult to summarize them. It is a challenge. I'll try to do so. The first webinar did explore new approaches to World Heritage conservation through interpretation. One, it is clear that the notion of outstanding universal value should better be open to intangible values and the diverse associated memories. Memories of local communities, of other associated groups, or even stakeholders beyond the borders of a country. The significance of a cultural or natural site is enriched by the recognition of multiple narratives. This requires a participatory process. Involving various stakeholders also contributes to the conservation of the site and to its sustainable development. Interpretation and presentation is part of the management plan. And finally, lessons could be drawn from the Convention on Intangible Heritage of 2003, allowing civil society to take part in the processes. A majority of World Heritage sites highlight common human achievements and cultural exchanges over time and space. There is a wide consensus on their universal significance. However, many sites have multiple and different memories, challenging the very concept of outstanding universal value. The second webinar did address that issue. It is clear that plural or dissonant interpretations are unavoidable and should be openly addressed. A stimulating debate can enlarge the significance of a site. This requires a multidisciplinary and inclusive approach. The significance of a heritage site is related to the historic context and can change over time. It can be connected to current concerns, namely human rights, sustainable development, or even climate change. The webinar considered that recognition of the multiple memories associated with the site must be part of the procedures of the World Heritage Committee, from nomination to monitoring and to capacity building. They did also consider that the new digital technologies make it possible for civil society and stakeholders associated with the site to feed wider pluralistic interpretations beyond the nationalist presentation of state parties. I personally believe that it is important to consider both the national and the international level. At the national level, contested memories associated with heritage sites can be observed due to the history of the site and very often the lack of recognition of cultural minorities or indigenous communities. And then we have the international level, as in the World Heritage Convention. At the international level, the issues are more critical, particularly in relation with past colonial or recent colonial dominations or recent conflicts. They require a tactful treatment. This is what we are invited to consider in this third webinar. After the general considerations, we have to examine concrete situations. Hagia Sophia and the Meiji industrial sites are currently under special attention. The idea is to analyze the situations from a public history perspective, trying to depoliticize the controversy and to elevate the debate to humanistic, social, or even spiritual values. Besides those two cases, the third input will come from the experience of the Memorial Itineraries of Slavery, a UNESCO program. It is a network of a large number of sites, a few of them being World Heritage sites. The itineraries have a memorial value as such, remembering the legacies of slavery and connecting memories to present concern of racial discrimination. Finally, I believe that we must keep in mind that the World Heritage Convention is an intergovernmental instrument between sovereign states parties. The decisions belong to them and to the World Heritage Committee. This means that political considerations are always present, as it can be observed already in the work of the World Heritage Committee. Our present session should try to depoliticize the discussion in the spirit of UNESCO experience of tolerance, dialogue, and cooperation in the service of peace. We should try to make some suggestions. However, the World Heritage Convention is there. We could try to explore how to improve its implementation through the operational guidelines and the working procedures of the World Heritage Committee. We could also consider another document that was adopted at the same time as the World Heritage Convention in 1972, I mean the recommendation concerning the protection of cultural and natural heritage at national level. We could have much more legal flexibility and to bring some additional measures that could be proposed as an addendum to that recommendation. This is the few words that I wanted to make as an introductory remarks. Now I would like to introduce our three distinguished panelists. I suppose I will see their bio on the screen. Thank you. Well, the first speaker will be Bisera Bencheva. She is full professor at Stanford University in art and art history. And she has been at Stanford for many years. She's the author of 3 books with the Pennsylvania State University, especially on Hagia Sophia and the Hagia Sophia space, sound and spirit. She had a Guggenheim Fellowship. She went to Rome with the American Academy Fellowship. She went to Berlin with also with Wissenschaftskolleg Fellowship and the Mellon New Directions Fellowship of Classical Arabic. Well, the next speaker will be Shume. Shall we see? There is Shume. She is associated professor at the Graduate Institute at National Taiwan University. She has a PhD in built environment. She is appointed as advisor to the Commission of Transitional Justice in Taiwan. She is also a member of the Urban Planning Committee of National Park Service of Taiwan. And she is currently editing another upcoming volume titled Frontiers of Memory in the Asia-Pacific, Difficult Heritage and Cross-Border Politics of Post-Colonial Nationalism. Maybe the next slide, please. And now the third speaker will be Ali Moussa Ye. He is a journalist for a long time. He was director of a press agency in Djibouti. But what is more interesting for us is that since 1997, he has been working at UNESCO in the Culture of Peace program, especially in the Horn of Africa. He was the coordinator of the UNESCO follow-up of the Durban World Conference Against Racism. And very important in relation to the presentation he's going to make, he was head of the History and Memory of Dialogue section in charge of the Slave Route Project, the General History of Africa, and the Silk Road projects. So we are fortunate to have 3 brilliant panelists. I will not speak longer. I suggest I shall give the floor first to Bishara, who is going to present the case of Hagia Sophia. Bishara, please, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Harry, and thank you, Jean-Louis. It's an honor to be here and to share my understanding of Hagia Sophia and what is the work of unity that we need to do. So I start. Hagia Sophia is one of the most extraordinary buildings in the world, with a history of 1,500 years. It has been the Cathedral of Constantinople, the seat of the Patriarch, and the majestic stage for liturgical and imperial ceremonies for almost 1,000 years. This long stretch of time was briefly interrupted in 1204 to 1261 during the Latin occupation of Constantinople in the aftermath of the Fourth Crusade. Hagia Sophia became a mosque immediately after the Ottoman conquest of 1453. The beauty of its interior, unified around a lofty luminous dome, became the new Ottoman idiom of sultanic mosque space, breaking with the tradition of linearity and seriality of the hypostyle prayer hall and promoting instead the unifying vision of an interior crowned by a radiant dome. Hagia Sophia has always been a symbol of power. For Byzantium, it stood for imperial authority and the claim for universality of the Orthodox Church. For the Ottoman Empire, it was a symbol of the triumph of Islam over Christianity and of the Ottomans over the Byzantines. In the end of the 16th century, it became a funerary monument when Sultan Selim II chose it for his burial site, and he instigated a tradition that continued in the following centuries. As the Ottoman Empire transformed in the late 16th century from offense to defense, Hagia Sophia also became a symbol of the orthodoxy of the Ottoman Sultan's Sunni understanding of Islam. The next major shift is in the 20th century, where the secularization of Hagia Sophia in 1934 from mosque into a museum transformed the monument into a symbol of the new republic. Kemal Atatürk defined modern Turkey as a secular state, cut off from the memory and legacy of the Ottoman past. The most recent reconversion in July 2020 is a reversal, an erasure of the secularist modern Turkey movement of Atatürk and the concomitant erasure of Byzantine Christian memory. The reconversion has also entrapped the monument for the deeply divisive politics of the current regime, a manipulation of the memory of the past in order to reinscribe violence and reinflict wounds rather than to heal and to rebuild. What makes Hagia Sophia extraordinary? It is its immense interior volume, enormous and luminous dome raised over 56 meters above the floor, circular motility invested in the semidomes and the exedra, and walls and pavement covered in polished, variegated marbles and gold mosaics. Together, this lithic and vitreous decor stirs the imagination to conjure the aesthetics of the sea and its coruscating waters. Spiritual movements in both Christianity and Islam respond to this image of the living waters of the sea. In addition to being an architectural marvel dating back to the 6th century, Hagia Sophia has exquisite Middle and Late Byzantine mosaics, starting with the image of the Virgin and Child in the apse. The naturalism in the modeling of the face of Mary is effortless and fluid, contrasting with the more schematic visualizations of the Theotokos, like the contemporary 9th century mosaic in Santa Maria in Dominica in Rome. The living waters of the sea. The rays of light, breeze, optical reflection, and acoustic reverberation are phenomena, metaphors and materiality within Hagia Sophia that make present the metaphysical in the sensorial. Thus, sensorial experience becomes a threshold of the spiritual. Natural light performs a continual diurnal circular dance, and this phenomenon visualizes the circular motility of the divine and holy wisdom, the concept to which this building is dedicated. The positioning of the windows in the drum of the dome and in the outer envelope enables the viewer to perceive its rotation in the course of the day and the year. The circular dynamic of sun rays pushes the soul to be uplifted to the divine, shapes an understanding of wisdom Sophia. The material shell of Hagia Sophia enacts this divine illumination that causes matter to become a reflective, incandescent mirror. The windows in the drum of the dome and in the apsis and exedra channel direct light from above, transforming sun rays into columns of light, giving a paradoxical perceptual appearance of tangible matter. Dust and smoke of incense can make the air dense and enhance this perceptual solidification of light. When rays penetrate the interior, they gradually descend to the floor, transforming its polished surface into pools of light, and thereby causing a concatenated perceptual metamorphosis of stone and light into the isomorphism of water. What in other buildings would be considered blinding glare, in Hagia Sophia becomes an incarnation of spirit in matter. This liquescence, or high reflectivity coefficient of the white Proconnesian marbles, endow Hagia Sophia with unusual aesthetic, in which the floor has higher reflectivity compared to the walls and ceiling, and this is in complete reversal of the modern building standards, where the ceiling has 80% of the reflectivity and the floor had the lowest. The aesthetics of water also has an acoustic dimension. The polished marble and the great interior volume of Hagia Sophia of over 250,000 cubic meters produces a reverberation time of over 10 seconds in the frequencies of the human voice. And you can see here from 30 more or less to a couple of kilohertz, the reverberation time is over 10 seconds. Chant as an agentive force is like sunlight. It animates the shell of the building. The interior reacts to this energy. Breathe it in, transforming the human voice into an emanation, and causing the intelligibility to be lost in the prosody, almost taste of sound. And I'll play a small snippet for you that is auralized in the acoustics of Hagia Sophia. The intangible aspects of coruscation, reflection, and reverberation have not been recognized with the UNESCO Category 6 designation. Thus, both the aesthetics and the acoustics of this masterpiece of world architecture are not protected. The current covering with carpet subdues the luminescence of the interior and undercuts the original aesthetic. The carpet also has an adverse effect on the acoustics, drying the wet sound. Thus, the intangible aspects of Hagia Sophia that mesmerize the senses, the play of sunlight and the reverberant acoustics, are compromised in the reconversion. The space can still be a mosque without the carpet or the veils covering the Virgin and Child. In fact, such an uncovered interior will be authentic to the first 250 years of the use of this building as a mosque. The sea aesthetic is special to both Christianity and Islam and makes Hagia Sophia different from all the Ottoman mosques it gave rise to. While the latter play with the aesthetics of the garden, Hagia Sophia stands for the spiritual vision of the sea. That alterity needs to be recognized and cherished. Both the Byzantine and the Islamic essence of this building were recognized in the 1985 inscription of this monument as part of the historical sites of Istanbul in UNESCO, but it is the Byzantine side that is erased in the current reconversion that happened so recently. And I would like to finish with filling this interior with spirituality can hinder the pitting of Christianity against Islam and enable us to share in this cultural heritage of the Mediterranean. Thank you.
Thank you, Bisera. Thank you very much. Well, this is a brilliant presentation of a masterpiece of architecture and spirituality. That shows also the difficulty of the World Heritage list, because Hagia Sophia was not listed as such, and it was not recognized with criterion 6, which is one of the problems we are going to face, because it is up to the Turkish government to manage the site. And I like the way you try to elevate the debate, showing the aesthetics, the acoustics, the scientific, all the exceptionality of that building. And finally, explaining that it could be a shell for spirituality, both for Christian and Muslim. I think this is one way to depoliticize the issue, and from a conservation perspective, to show the interest of a better approach, including with the interpretation. Well, I will not be longer because you have been very clear. I would give the floor to Shumei for a presentation concerning the Meiji industrial site. Please, Shumei, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. Hello, everyone. I'm Shumei Huang from Taiwan. It's truly my honor to be here. And today, in this case of the Meiji site, I would like to bring the laborers' memories back to industrial heritage. Before presenting the case, I want to be clear about how I see memory as our connection with the past, as the connection between the past and future, and among people. And according to Abishai Marklet, it can even make possible the kind of thick relations that we can call truly ethical. And if we put that kind of theoretical discussion in the context of the Meiji site, then in remembering Hashima Island, the state narratives as shown on the interpretation device outside, as you can see in the photo, is very different from the former labors. There's a big gap, and it is the gap that deserves our attention. Here, I'm showing you the materials being circulated in 2015 when the nomination was made. The OUV of the Meiji sites was explained as follows. The OUV of a group of sites is founded primarily on their demonstration of the first successful transfer of industrialization to a non-Western nation. They represent the primal historical and archaeological evidence of the emergence of modern industrial Japan. And the Meiji period mentioned here dated from 1850 to 1910. Next to the booklet, I'm showing you a survey done by a Japanese architectural historian. And you can see on the cover that its focus was between 1952 to 1970. And it was actually about the challenging life of living in extreme density on the isolated tiny island, which, however, was not included in the nomination. And if we continue to compare these materials, we can see again some kind of gap among different multiple memories to the same site.
Sorry, Shumei, can you please be a bit louder because we cannot hear you very well?
Okay. Is this better?
Yes, clear. Thank you. Go on.
Okay, sorry. So to be precise, the Meiji sites, in terms of the Meiji sites, there are 23 components in 11 sites across 8 areas. And 6 of the 8 areas are in the southwest of Japan, as you can see in the map on the left. In particular, there's a lot of concentration in Yamaguchi, where the former Prime Minister Abe's hometown is. And we can see the Hashima Island, the most famous case and the most contested case, is located in Area 6, that is in Nagasaki. So among the many issues of the Meiji site case, one particular issue has to do with periodization and thereof selective remembering. I'm showing you a table that was shown in the booklet and also on its official website. And here you can see how the 60-year time span between 1850s to 1910s was divided into 3 phases, including trial and error experimentation, direct importation of Western technology, and full-blown industrialization, which obviously focuses on the process of industrialization from the government's perspective. And again, here I'm showing you the criteria that make the Meiji site qualify as World Heritage. But again, the issue of periodization is one of the most controversial parts. And by leaving out the years following 1910, the historical issues of colonialism and forced labor are removed. And that has been the argument by Japan throughout the meeting. So even though the nomination was successful in 2015, it still draw a lot of criticism from, of course, Korea, China, but also from scholars around the world. And therefore, there were a lot of meetings made discussing this important case, and therefore there was this interpretation strategy being formulated to address this issue. And here I would like to bring your attention to the red lines. While the period relevant to OUV will be the primary focus, interpretation will also include important aspects of each of the component part before and after the period related to OUV. So here we can see how the interpretation strategy and this one, this was a document recognized and published by the Japan government, tried to respond to the issue. Unfortunately, even with this document, the current presentation and interpretation of the Meiji site is still not satisfying. And so here I would like to suggest that perhaps interpretation of heritage can find inspiration from another program under UNESCO, that is Memory of the War. And in particular, I would like to bring your attention to one of these latest register related to and actually predates the Meiji site's nomination, that is the Sakubei Yamamoto collection. Yamamoto, who was this old gentleman that you can see on the right, used to be a coal mine worker at the Chikuhobachi at Fukuoka Prefecture at the age of just 7. So in 1899, when he was just a boy, he went down to the mines with his fathers and his older brothers, which was not an unusual pattern of work for coal mining communities in Kyushu in the late 19th and early 20th century. And of course, this can raise the issue of child labor. But what amazed me and a lot of us in Taiwan is that the local government and the local university in Fukuoka prefecture were not hesitant to highlight this collection. Indeed, Yamamoto left us an amazing collection of painting, annotated painting that show his memory of difficult work and all the vivid scene of hard labor that you can see in the coal mine. And this is a scene of a celebration held in Chikuho. And I'm quoting a paragraph from the nomination document here to show you how industrialization was understood differently from the memory of the laborers. Quote, the rapid expansion of coal mining demanded a much increased workforce, and miners during the period recorded by Sakubei Yamamoto included former rural workers, both men and women, and their children, tradesmen, ex-convicts, and foreign laborers. So here again, I'm amazed by the local governments being honest, featuring these rather darker side of industrialization. And what's more inspiring is that this domination actually have become a new source for social historians to study the labor history during the Meiji period. And this particular collection even traveled to Taiwan in 2018 and encourage people in Taiwan to do the same with our own coal mining history. So here I think this case can serve as a rather positive case that we can make something positive out of negative heritage, or in Japanese, funo isan, if we are willing to open up to different memory from different perspectives. So in conclusion, I am in juxtaposing this MOW, the register of Yamamoto collection, to the Meiji sites. I want to bring labor's voice back to industrial heritage. And I think that would be a particular task to do in a global age for us to nurture the sense of a global community. And that should not be limited by national borders. And also, I think what we can learn from a Memory of the World program is that it allows for the non-state actors to take as important role as the state actor. So local government, local university, local museum, and NGOs can play a role, as opposed to, in the case of the Meiji site, it was the states working with business conglomerates in highlighting the Meiji site. And I think if we don't fundamentally adjust the nation states' roles in sometimes manipulating heritage politics, then any alternative programs or charters can become sites of contestation or for still weapons in geopolitics. And I believe that's not the role we would like to take as a global government. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shumei, for this presentation. Well, you made some conclusions, so that I don't have to draw them. You insist on the fact that we need a role for the, besides the state parties from outside, and also that cross-border dialogue is important. This is very much the task of UNESCO, and this helps me establish the link with the next presentation from Ali, who will present the UNESCO program of the memorial itineraries of slavery. Thank you, Shumei. Ali, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jean-Louis. Thank you, dear colleague. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to explain a little bit the experience of UNESCO regarding the slave trade and slavery. The slave trade and slavery have marked, as we all know, the history of humanity and hold some of the worst record of crime that man can commit for greed. Far from being a minor event of the past, this tragedy is today considered to be at the foundation of our modern world by the capital accumulated during the slave trade, which was invested in the industrialization and capitalistic companies, by the fierce struggle against slavery, which influenced the movement of human rights and redefined the very notion of dignity, liberty, and equality, by the disastrous socio-economic, cultural, and psychological legacy of slavery, which continue to reproduce inequality, racial discrimination, and racism, and finally, by the intercultural dialogue born from this forced encounter of people which transformed the cultural heritage and identity of contemporary society. Surprisingly, despite this historical importance, the slave trade and slavery has been the subject of an organized silence in society, in the media, in museums, in politics, in academia, and in education. The combination of two types of shames may explain this long silence, in my view. The shame of the enslavers and their descendants for what they did to other human beings, and the shame felt by the descendants of enslaved people because of the humiliating treatment received by their parents. So it was to break this silence that the Slave Route Project was created in 1994 by UNESCO, which considered that ignoring such a major tragic historical event constitutes in itself an obstacle to mutual understanding, reconciliation, and peace. The debate on the site related to slavery constitute, therefore, an interesting example of contested memories. Progressively, the stakes shift from the moral request to the duty to remember to the political affirmation of the right to memory. So in my view, this confrontation has passed through, can say, three different phases. Up to 1970s, the confrontation raged between the public authorities trying to deny or minimize this history and communities claiming its recognition. From the around 1980s, 1990s, the debate turned around what aspect of slavery should be highlighted in museum, in monument, in historical narrative. The achievement of abolitionists or the experience of enslaved people and the disastrous legacy of slavery. Today, the question is whether the policy of official apologies and of revision of national narratives would be sufficient to respond to the claim of the communities of Afro-descendants for reparation. It is in this context that the conservation and promotion of the tangible heritage of slavery became a crucial issue. There have been an increasing awareness of concerned stakeholders about the role that site of memory can play in the process of national reconciliation, in the reinforcement of social cohesion, and in the elaboration of more inclusive national narratives. Therefore, the inclusion of slavery memorial sites in national and international topographies emerged as one of the most effective means to fight not only against the denial and oblivion, but also against historical distortion. To that end, the UNESCO Slave Route Project developed a series of advocacy material, including a methodology encouraging countries to formulate appropriate policies for the identification, preservation, and promotion of their memorial sites. The project even launched a label called Site of Memory associated with the UNESCO Slave Route to recognize and award the effort of local authorities and communities in preserving their memorial heritage. In order to facilitate the participation of local authorities and civil society organizations, the label was granted through a simplified procedure by the Secretariat of the project after consultation of its International Scientific Committee and information of National Commission to UNESCO. Thanks to this advocacy and orientation, many countries in the Americas, Caribbean, Africa, Indian Ocean, and Europe understood inventories of their site and place of memory in view of building a memorial itineraries and promote memorial tourism. Convinced that this history presents universal ethical lesson for humanity, some of these countries have even taken the next step by expressing their wish to inscribe some of their most emblematic sites on the UNESCO World Heritage List. There are today around 36 sites and properties linked to the history of slavery, which are inscribed in the World Cultural and Natural Heritage List, 40 sites which are on the indicative list, but also we have around 20 expression and cultural practices on the intangible cultural heritage representative list. In 2018, the Slavery Project published a handbook for the manager of sites and itineraries of memory, which provides a comparative analysis of experience as well as a conceptual and practical advice for in the promotion of slavery related memorial heritage. Recalling the ethical stakes of this memory, the handbook alerts the manager of site about the trap of built stone, which accords more importance to architectural dimension of the material remains, neglecting the complex interaction between the natural environment and human creation. It also overlooks the indigenous interpretation of the cosmogonic relationship between the visible and invisible world. In the African and diasporic context, such a pitfall is damaging as it ignores both the sacred and social function embodied in certain element of nature, such as trees, forests, mountains, caves, lakes, and rivers. In fact, recognizing the importance of symbolic or spiritual sites, such as place of resistance, sacrifice, and worship, requires a pluralistic perspective and a holistic understanding of the different dimensions of memorial heritage. Therefore, restrictive criteria on the meaning of heritage can lead, in the case of slavery, to honor the deeds of the slavers rather than the memory of the victims. In some very touristic islands of the Caribbean and the Indian Ocean, this risk is real, as the commercial obligation to satisfy the mostly Western tourists sometimes pushes to overvalue the colonial heritage. By showing the colonial mansions and buildings, and by forgetting to specify that these residents, this fortification and installation were built by the enslaved people themselves, the risk would be to ignore the horror of the slavery system and therefore miss the primary objective of such site of memory. Furthermore, some description of sites related to slavery that are inscribed in the World Heritage List commit this kind of mistake by focusing more on the technical and architectural ingenuity of the slave trafficker, overlooking the appealing condition of the enslaved people who built these properties. To avoid such trap, the UNESCO handbook invites to question the dominant criteria on the appreciation of the aesthetic, historical, and tourist value of the heritage related to slavery. It highlights the importance of reflecting on criteria which take better account of the symbolic, spiritual, and social significance of the concerned population that the concerned population grant themselves to site and place of memory. After more than 4 decades of application of the World Heritage Convention, it is time to assess the way in which the principle of outstanding universal value is perceived and implemented in different regions of the world. The reflection developed through the Slave Route Project and the General History of Africa project helped to question and challenge some Eurocentric interpretation of a certain number of concept, paradigm, and categorization about heritage and universal values. This reflection highlighted the necessity to assess the African and Afro-descent memorial heritage in light of the new reconceptualization and interpretation that came out of the current debate on the decolonization of humanities. There is therefore an urgent need to engage a critical dialogue between the different actors, making, for instance, use of the tremendous multi-perspective knowledge developed through other UNESCO programs such as the Silk Road, the General and Regional Histories, the Memory of the World. the concept of heritage, memory, and universal values need to be revisited and redefined in order to build a new common understanding which could better accommodate the plurality of their interpretation. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ali, for this very dense presentation. You are not only raising questions, but are already giving answer and proposals to face the challenges that you are exploring. I like very much the cross-border dialogue, which is at the basis of the route. I like the way you highlight the intangible dimension and the sacred natural sites that are so important in many countries, but especially in Africa. I like the way that some sites are World Heritage Site of the Convention, some of them on the 203 Intangible Convention, and some that are not. The connection of all those sites give an opportunity for all sides to improve their practice. And finally, you have the proposal of the handbook, which gives some guidelines on the way to manage a site. Thank you very much. Well, we are at the end of the 4 presentation. Now, the organizers ask us to treat 4 subtopics that you have received. And I will just raise the first one, which is a question: to what extent can each case issue be addressed in the World Heritage Convention, given the political context? The 3 of you did already mention it, but it would be interesting to address the question as such. I don't know who would like to take the floor or make a comment. Bisera, Shume, Ali? What are the limits of the World Heritage Convention?
Well,
you did all, this is in line with what you have already been saying. Please,
yes, exactly. I have exactly. I have already touched upon this issue, and I think, of course, now there is really a real will to try to accommodate now this new sensibility for painful memories like the slavery, but also other painful memories, and I think what I said, we have to go beyond this aesthetics and architectural conception of what we call a World Heritage. And I was always shocked when I go to visit forts and sites of inscribed in the list. And when I read about how the guides and even the authorities of the country present this, they are so happy to present the stones. Here is this 18th and 16th century, beautiful designing. And I say, but you are forgetting that it was enslaved people who built this. Where is the narratives about what they suffer? And I think perhaps the way that the World Heritage cultural list, heritage is conceived at the beginning, really does not help to go beyond what I call the trap of the built stone.
I understand. We must bear in mind that the convention speaks about places. You have to need a territory and very often the building. That's why it is so complicated to enrich the interpretation of the site with the human and the human dimension of it. This is not only in sites connected to slavery. This is also in any temple, a church, a historic building. There is a tendency to forget the people, the social dimension behind it. You agree. But my question is, you cannot change the convention. how can we improve the process of the World Heritage Committee and the advisory body in order to take into account what you are asking for? I asked it to you, but it could maybe Bishara or Shume would be able to answer. Please, Bishara.
I have a couple of suggestions. I am a scholar, and clearly my field is not cultural heritage. I'm a medievalist, but what I see as a very important aspect is how the sites are presented. And this is the place where I see scholars playing a role. It's how we shape the memory. And so I would consider important that there is some oversight of how governments present the sites once they're inscribed in the list. And with the case of Hagia Sophia, in the recent government site online, the website on Hagia Sophia, it had completely reduced the narrative, and it does no longer, in a sense, allow for outstanding universal value, because the entire narrative is only about Ottoman. There are 2 paragraphs on Byzantium, and they're all negative. And so there should be some oversight. And this, because it shapes the memory of new generations. Then there is the other question that Ali brought about what is more than what the hand could touch. And I fully sympathize with that. And in fact, the way we have looked at architecture, we have looked in the shell, but we have not recognized what it contains. And this reminds me of a very important text of Heidegger, The Thing, where he says modernity is about this separation, that we look at the material of the vessel, but not what it actually does, which is to hold. So it is ingathering that is essential. And plural narratives are about ingathering these diverse voices. And so when I started working on Hagia Sophia, even within my field, academic field, the fact that I talked about spirit was questioned at the beginning because it's intangible. How can you speak about something that is intangible, that is glitter or reverberation? It took a decade, in a sense, to convince the field that that's an important aspect. It's about recognizing spirit in the space. So my bottom line is that there should be oversight in the way the sites are presented to the public, because once a monument is inscribed, and I speak from the point of view of Hagia Sophia, it has both local stakeholders, but it also has international stakeholders. And the narrative that is presented needs to speak to all parties. And here we have a conscious change and a conscious erasure that had happened 25 years after the inscription of the monument. And we should guard against that, because this is not a new site. It's an old site that from its inscription had plurality of voices, and now it's reduced to one. And it's not just the Byzantine, it's not just the Christian, it is also the secularist identity of Turkey, which is also pitted against the Islamite identity of Turkey. And I find that this flattening of the discourse is dangerous, and this is where an international organization could step in. And a website that everyone could access could be censored.
I think academics have a responsibility in it, because you cannot ask the World Heritage Committee to do so, but you can, from outside, some people who have a plural approach with people from different cultural regions, if they have, it's very much like when you have 10 Nobel Prize people who take a stand, all the governments are listening to it because it has some weight in the public opinion. I believe we should try to find such a kind of intervention where academic could play a role. But I don't know, Shume, do you want to intervene on that point? Otherwise, we move to the next one, please.
Well, I totally agree with what Sarah just said, and I just want to add briefly about the fact that it's always the contemporary community, national states interpreting the past, and we has always to be careful and be aware of the fact that it in the longer term, border changes all the time. People travel, people interact all the time, and it's I think it's extremely unfortunate if we limit our interpretation of heritage by the rather short time frame that we are seeing, and unfortunately, always most of the time dominated by the national state, at least in the case of the World Heritage Convention.
If I understand correctly, the objectives of our World Heritage Program that is being with the leader of Christina Cameron, Francesco Bandarin, they really want to look for a way for civil society, universities, and other voices to be able to express their opinion so that we could go beyond the nationalistic presentation by a state party and have a more global and more diverse presentation of the site. I think this is one of the ways we could try to find it practically, given the legal constraints of the convention, one way to move forward. Shall we move to the next subtopics?
Yes.
The next question is, what interpretive approaches would you recommend for the treatment of different or conflicting memories? How to deal with conflicting memories? Not an easy question. Who wants to take the risk to give her an answer?
Well, maybe I can start.
Yes, please do.
I always find dialogue much more inspiring than just supplying a conclusion, a definition. And lately I came across the underwater heritage. It's also part of a UNESCO program dealing with the First World War cases, and to promote the understanding and mutual understanding across the communities. The program invited young people and high school students from England, from France, from Germany to learn about this underwater heritage and to learn about their past. I found that kind of program really inspiring and empowering. So instead of we continuously supplying the future generation what we should believe, we created occasions and adequate materials to encourage conversation. And I think in that kind of conversation, we also don't want to these participants can feel comfortable sharing their understanding, and sometimes, yes, they might have stereotype understanding before they have this dialogue, but people can feel comfortable sharing that, and then they may come to an agreement, mutual understanding after having.
Thank you, Shumei. Any other intervention, Ali or Bisera?
Well, I think when it comes to a very conflicting or painful memory, I think here the academic research can really play a great role, because it's very, very difficult to reconcile when it comes to the painful memories or conflicting memories. It's very difficult to reconcile as such. And here we really need to engage academia so that the historical and scientific truths can, some historical scientific truth can be brought. And I think in a certain way, that is what we did, UNESCO did through this general collection of histories, general and regional histories, because we talk about the different war, the different conflict that happened throughout the world, but the fact that we established an international scientific committee composed of the different stakeholders that we discuss at the academic level had to trans conflictual memories and history. So here I serious and honest the scientific to try to find some truth or into account the sensibility of the different.
Sorry, I think Ali's internet environment is not very good at the moment.
Now it's okay?
Yes.
Yes.
You were disconnected for a bit.
Okay, sorry. So, no, I was just saying that when it comes to that kind of painful or conflicting memories, I think it's important to begin with this academic research to bring together from different perspectives and different discipline to try to find a scientific consensus about the history of those memories, and then go back to the communities to see what they can accept, what they can refuse, and how we can bring together these communities for a possible reconciliation of memories.
And I will stop here.
Bisera, yes, please.
I will stop here, combining both the responses of Shumei and Ali. I absolutely believe in the need for dialogue, and that in conversation, in a sense, when you have more of the stakeholders invested in this monument, to have their voice heard, and that could create the texture through which you build. Now, academic research is important, and clearly I represent that side. But I also want to argue in a more complex way about what academic research is. What I have discovered working on Hagia Sophia, that aesthetics is an incredible threshold that actually allows large audiences to come and to communicate in their response to monuments and to build environment. And so I would say light and sound are profound. And you can bring audiences coming from different religions with these ideas. And I find that aesthetics and phenomenology, it can be historically circumscribed phenomenology that goes against the colonizing Western view of scholarship, which is rational discourse, which privileges mind over body. I argue for saturated phenomenon that is sensorially experienced. And in a sense, that when we deal with sacred sites, whether it's a tree in the landscape or whether it's a man-made structure, we're dealing with the metaphysical and the capacity, in a sense, to recognize the metaphysical in the material. And that's where the senses play a role. There is a Byzantine, I'll quote here from memory, Maximus the Confessor in the 7th century says that language we use to structure the affairs of our everyday life, but the senses is how we reach the divine. So, in other words, I argue for academia that recognizes that there is something beyond the rational and that there is something beyond language. And that's where, in a sense, the glitter, the reverberation, all of this would play a role. And also where, in a sense, my collaborative work with people who are in acoustics and digital technology had really played a role, because creating the enveloping sound of Hagia Sophia, even outside Hagia Sophia, is what makes 21st century audience connect to this monument and mean something to them. I spoke a lot. I stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe it is important not to leave the two parties in a bilateral dialogue. It should be broader with multidisciplinary approach and people from different cultural regions, so that could help to elevate the discussion and to reach what is mentioned by Bisera, to address the soul of the people and the soul of the civilization. We can move to the next subtopics if you agree. The question is, how can sites of memory contribute to the plurality of historical perspectives in the construction of national identity? what can we learn from best practice? I think, once again, I think that was a question Ali would be happy to deal with. Ali, okay?
Yes. Well, first of all, I think we need to already at the country level to develop the idea of the multiple identity. But what we call the national identity is mostly in most of the country is always as like a unique and monolithic national identity. But if we already develop a conception of the national identity, which is plural and multiple, it will facilitate and open the door for a plural and pluralistic interpretation of the history of the country. So I think it's by bringing again different interpretation of the same historical fact by engaging a real conversation and dialogue among those different interpretations to try with the aim of trying to find some commonalities beyond the differences, beyond sometimes the conflict of history and memory, by asking everybody participating in the dialogue to find that commonalities. And with this background that a country can have a plural identity and can incorporate and accommodate that plural identity, I think that is a way of trying to solve this this idea of I'm trying to find to solve this plural the plurality of historical perspective. And the good practices, I think, is again, the good practices is what we have organized, for instance, around the issue of slavery, bringing the descendant of enslaved people with the descendant of enslavers to discuss what we call the psychological consequences of the slavery, because we realize that each camp has been really affected psychologically by this. The descendant of the enslavers are still suffering from that, but mostly they don't even question why they are afraid of, for instance, why they want to live in a segregated neighborhood with only white people. And by the discussion, we realized that they are fear to remind of those descendants of enslaved people. So bringing them together, saying we all are victims in a certain way of the slavery. We all have a psychological consequences, and let's talk to see how we can heal ourselves together. And I think that's also another way of addressing this issue.
Well, I don't know whether you had the opportunity to watch the webinar #1, because there was a presentation of the Coalition of Sites of Conscience. And I believe that what you are just explaining is a kind of approach proposed by Sites of Conscience, which can help very much in case of conflicting memories. Any other intervention from Shumei or Bisera? Because we are running out of time. Maybe I will move to the next point, unless you want to take the floor. Shumei?
I will be very brief. But I have to say that I don't want to emphasize the relationship between heritage and national identity. In particular, I believe that the creation of world heritage is trying to overcome that. But in academia, we have this notion that we call methodological nationalism, which assumes that the nation states is the only powerful, effective social unit for analysis. I think World Heritage Program has that potential for us to overcome these. And in the case of the Meiji site that I talked about today, I think it, and I just show how it can be a site for social historians or communities from Korea, from China, from where the POW belongs to study their past, their shared past. If the host country is willing to open it up to all the associated community, and maybe in so doing, the host community can also obtain renewed national identity. So that's my brief comment to this question.
Thank you, Shumei. I propose we move to the last subtopic. The question is how to reach an inclusive interpretation and presentation of heritage sites, with a particular question, what role of education for the pluralistic memory of a heritage site? Maybe about education, Bisera could make a contribution. Bisera, please.
My thoughts about Hagia Sophia evolve, continuously evolve. So I think that as a monument with international stakeholdership, I think all the international means, which means websites and international exhibitions, they are means through which to show the pluralistic value of Hagia Sophia. And I have been inspired to develop research into the Sufi and Brethren of Purity, for instance, spiritual understanding of Islam that is very consonant with the Neoplatonic aesthetic, the 6th century Neoplatonic aesthetic in Hagia Sophia. And it shows a different side of Islam, which is outside the immediate preview of Sunni Islam. And I think I agree with Shumei that there are multiple histories that could be told, and I find a turn to this spiritual aspect very important. So I speak about websites, exhibitions, but I also think that activating people on the ground is essential. Being inside this building is essential. We could not reduce it to digital images and acoustic reconstructions. And I find that it will be important soon to be in this building and speak about the aesthetics of in this building. So I find all these channels of we teach with love. You cannot learn you cannot learn new things if there is no love. And so I find that this is the approach that we need to do. And I would also say that Turkey had invested in acknowledging the Byzantine past, cultural heritage, the centers for Byzantine studies that have been established. We're talking about a reversal that is so recent, and it is dangerous because we're talking about the last 5 years, 10 years. The fact that the International Congress for Byzantine Studies, which was scheduled to take place in August of this year, is rescheduled and changed. The location has changed from Turkey to Italy. It just shows that there is a closing that is taking place in front of our eyes and a erasure taking place in front of our eyes, which is different from, in a sense, a lease motivation, a lease project, which is to open up, to start a conversation, to speak about the complexity of the event. Here with Hagia Sophia, the start was there in 1934, 1935. What we're seeing is the change. Is a change of what, which means that monuments are living creatures. Their memory, their presence, their aura could be enhanced or reduced. With Hagia Sophia, we see the reduction. With the recent events, I'll speak also from the American point of view, had really brought the subject of race, of slavery at the forefront. And there is a lot of sympathy to go together and try to embrace that difficult memory. With Hagia Sophia, it's just the opposite. So the sun rises and the sun sets on the other end. And as a scholar, we need to keep our voices, as I think I'll stop here.
Okay. Well, Harry doesn't say anything, but I am afraid we are behind schedule. And unless Ali or Shumei wants to add a point, we could move to the question and answer session. I will try to reach to have a look. And there are several questions. I choose one of them. This is for Becerra. In the case of Hagia Sophia, could a committee propose to consider it as heritage in danger? Or is that responsibility of each state regarding its heritage? Could this be a way to leave room for narratives different from the ones of those in power?
The answer could only be complex because it's a complex issue, but I don't find it particularly productive to go against the state. And I think that we have other media through which to bring awareness of this process of erasure and to try to counteract it. And I find building a website about Hagia Sophia that is sympathetic to the rich inheritance of both Christian and Muslim spirituality is a step forward. I also think organizing an international exhibition on Hagia Sophia in a major center will be of primary importance, and motivating action on the ground, having a day in which you have tours in Hagia Sophia that address this complexity of history will be important. Clearly, in terms of how to organize on the ground, my response is the weakest right now. I'm thinking about that. With the other two means of website and exhibition, I am much more developed in my thinking of what can happen. I believe the door has not closed, and I don't want to address the conflict at the conflict, but actually to avoid the conflict and seek ways in which, as Shumei said, we could have a dialogue. That's what is important.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. In line with what you said, it is important also to try to prevent divergent and conflicting situation. That maybe that is a role that could be played by the advisory body and the World Heritage Committee at the time of the inscription on the phase of monitoring and in capacity building. And the idea of having new digital resources was also a proposal from webinar number 1, because this brings new opportunities for a pluralistic approach to be heard about any specific site. Any additional point by Ali or Shumei on that point, or shall I move to the next question? The next question is well, in sites that deal with relatively recent history, it is difficult and tragic. Such memory is painful. What should be done for the memory while the victims are alive, and what role do you expect the center could play? Not an easy question. What role for the victims when they are still living? This is the first part of the question. Ali, you did mention it when you tried to bring together the sender of slaves and the sender of masters. But well, the descendants. But now the question is about the people who did experience the difficult. Maybe this is for Shumei. Would you have a comment on that question? How to address those who have been experiencing the hardship of history?
Well, in the case of addressing the indigenous people's case in Taiwan, um, um, we found it important to make sure that the victims herself themselves have they themselves can decide to what degree they want to express and in what form they want to express. There are some victims who would rather keep silent till the end, and that's something to respect too. Um, so I think that the point I want to make is that I think there's a difference between seeing the past, the painful past as scientific knowledge to extract, and seeing the painful past as human experience to respect for.
I don't know whether anybody wants to add a reflection on that point. Ali, maybe. Thank you. We don't hear you.
Yes, I was
Microphone.
saying that. Yeah. Now it's okay?
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I was saying that it is a very challenging, issue of trying to create a dialogue or around a very recent painful memory, and I'm taking the example of the Tutsi genocide in Rwanda. In Ethiopia, there was the genocide perpetuated by the communist regime during in the 70s and 80s. I think it's very, very difficult to bring both together, the victims and those who participated in the genocide, because of course it's too recent. And so I see a different steps. I mean, the first thing to be done is to collect as much as information and testimonies from the victims. And surprisingly, the victims are not always interested to recall what they suffered, and it took them a long time to really be able to tell the testimony. So, but I think the first thing to be done is to really collect the testimony, to try to show, well, we have a museum in Rwanda, very, very, moving when you go in to see what happened. You can make a museum as they did, but also you can keep at least these testimonies for a future, utilization through a museum or through other ways. But for the time being, I don't know if there is any reconciliation or dialogue that can be done around that memory. I think that kind of memory needs a certain time to appease and to calm down, to really begin to talk about that. And perhaps the only way, and here I agree with Becerra, that the spirituality aspect that they mentioned, if those people, the victim and the perpetrator, also have a believe in faith and have perhaps it's possible to pass through that as a burden and forgiveness purpose. That may help, but it's very challenging to do something with this recent conflict. And so far, I don't think that there is a best practice I can really share about that.
Once again, I'd like to mention the experience of sites of conscience I have seen in Latin America, in Guatemala, and in Brazil before Bolsonaro, and in Argentina. They did manage to bring together victims and perpetrators. And that was quite an experience. The methodology is a very specific one. And I think we should pay attention to that kind of experience because it could help in some very painful situation. On the other hand, we also have I would like to mention what did happen in Germany, because the Germans did make work on their memory. And when you visit some industrial site in Germany, where there has been forced labor during the war, they do mention it. It was not mentioned at the time of the inscription because people did not pay attention to it. But once the attention was drawn from the site manager, they did decide to mention the fact that there had been slave work. So it takes time, it takes maybe pressure from outside, but in the long term, some countries understand that it is their own interest to be more open-minded and to recognize the harm that has been done in the past. So let's be optimistic. I don't know, Harry, because I am afraid we are behind schedule. I would like maybe to try to conclude now.
Yes,
well,
please.
We had such a, is it okay, Harry, now?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, it's difficult because, well, we have been mentioning so many. I would like to maintain as main points that the necessity to revisit the concept of outstanding universal value, to keep it, but enrich it by recognizing the different sensibility in the different culture and the different regions of the world. This is one point. I like also the point that has been stressed that it is necessary
준비해 주시고 저로 넘겨주세요, 이제.
besides the state party, to have a voice for civil society and the academic circle so that you can broaden the interpretation of the site, especially using digital technology that can allow many effective exercise. And I'd like to keep one of the remarks from Becerra's conclusion. It is not only a matter of rational, but we have to deal with social, with the people, and with the soul of the people, the spirituality. This is maybe one way to overcome the too practical dispute between any heritage site. I know it is much too short as a conclusion because the discussion was much more rich, but well, we have to stick to the schedule. We are already behind schedule. So I will thank you for your participation, for your involvement, and I would give the floor to Harry. Thank you to the preparatory office for the Center for Interpretation and Presentation, the center that will be established at the end of this year. Good luck in your project and in your work. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean-Louis. Thank you all so much for making this webinar all the more meaningful and interesting with your contributions and participations. I hope today's discussion will contribute to addressing the issues that we are facing in relation to the heritage with contested memories. And I think today's session will lead to the subject of our next webinar in May, Peace and Reconciliation through Heritage Interpretation. Next webinar will be particularly presenting interesting film works submitted from all around the world through a video contest that we have been running, speaking about dissonant heritage in their community. So this webinar will be uploaded on our YouTube and Facebook later, so you can watch it again after this event. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you at the next webinar in May. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.